What's up, guys? Welcome back to Bible from the Duns. Today we're in Luke chapter 12. Let's get started.
All right, Luke chapter number 12. We're right in the middle of some of Jesus's most practical teaching for all of his disciples. Now, what's interesting, like when you begin this chapter in verse number 1, here's what it says. In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all. Now, I want to just kind of pause and just show you something here. Notice the progression that's happened from chapter 11 to now chapter 12, because in chapter 11, verse 29, the story says, and while the crowds were thickly gathered together, he began to say. So they're just thickly gathered together there. But now by verse number 1 in chapter 12, they cannot even count how many people have shown up. And as the people are gathering together, they're like ants crawling all over each other. There's people everywhere. Jackson and I just got back today. We just got back from church camp. And we spent the last few days in a spot where a bunch of kids everywhere, all over the place, running all over and finding nooks and crannies on hillsides to listen to devotions and inside for worship services. And what Jesus is doing, he's connecting the dots between these kinds of gatherings, and they're growing and growing and growing. And Jesus gives... He's giving spiritual principles, but he's giving some real practical stuff. He's talking to him about worry. He's talking to him about food. He's talking to him about greed. Just good, solid stuff. What I noticed while I was reading through this was just all the gentle ways that Jesus talks to these people. So he calls them his disciples. At the beginning of the chapter, he calls them his friends. He calls them little flock, like little lambs. He's also talking about their father, which implies that they're children. I mean, he uses such gentle words, but you'll notice he didn't use those same gentle words when he was talking yesterday in chapter 11 to the Pharisees. He had very direct words to them. And I think it comes down to verse number 1. Now, just notice this. He began to say to his disciples, first of all. So who's he talking to? He's talking to his own people, first of all. Jesus is talking to his own people before he talks to the crowd, and he's warning them about the sincerity of their own heart. See, Jesus is going to have a lot here to say about hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is when we say one thing, but we do another. And he's going to talk a whole lot here about how hypocrisy can be like when you add yeast that makes dough rise. And kind of the similarity is that yeast slowly gets into the dough. And it doesn't have a whole lot of obvious signs that it's getting in there, but it has the ability to get to the heart of the dough and to warp it and to just infect the whole thing. He says that's what insincerity, what hypocrisy, and even what greed does. These are things, they don't look like they're getting inside of us, but once they take root, they change the whole dynamic of the thing. And so Jesus is going to take us and he's going to show us, he's going to put all of life in two baskets. There's the stuff in this world, then there's the stuff in eternity. Jack's picked up on a parable about that. Give it to us.
Okay, so this is the parable of the rich fool, as it's titled in my Bible. And in verses 19 and 20, it says, Then I'll say to myself, you have many goods stored up for many years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your life is demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Okay, so what happens in this section? So this man, he's worked his whole life so that he could store up all this food, and he decides that in his old age, he's just going to take it easy and live life without having to work. But what he didn't do was put in any work towards his spiritual life. And so on that night, he died, and all of that just went to waste, and there was no hope.
That's right. You know, Jackson and I were talking a little earlier. We were talking about why was it so wrong that the man had stored up food. And we talked about, it sounds kind of weird. Jackson even said it sounds wise to store up food. Well, the difference here is that this guy had stored up everything he needed to live in this world. The problem was he didn't realize how very close to death he was. And whereas he put in all that work, like Jack says, preparing for this world, he put no time in preparing his soul for eternity. And when it was time for his soul to go into eternity, because he had done all earthly things and no eternal things, then he had nothing in eternity and he lost everything on earth. Can I tell you this? I think that it would do us all well. We would all be good if we would really consider, have we put enough thought and enough fruit up in eternity? Like, what's going to happen to us when we die? Is God going to be proud of us when we stand before him? Are we going to be called good and faithful servants? All of this stuff is important. And then Jesus even talks about, he gives glimpses of this connection between the master coming back for his servants. Like in this parable of the faithful and the evil servant. Verse number 35 says, let your waist be girded and your lamps be burning. What's that mean? It means be dressed to keep the lights on. And what does that mean? It means you're waiting. Matter of fact, the next verse says, and you yourselves be like men who wait for their master when he will return. And so what Jesus is talking about here is that a mature servant knows how to wait for his master. Can I tell you one of the most difficult things in this world to do? Whether it's at a stoplight, at a checkout register, or just in a line, one of the most difficult things is just waiting. But can I tell you this? We always wait for what we can't do without. If I'm ever in a line and I look ahead at what's coming up ahead and I go, I don't really need that. You know what I can do? I don't have to wait. I can leave. But if I have to have it, I'll wait as long as it takes. Now, I may not be happy to wait, but I will wait. We are servants who wait for our master. Why? Because what else but him do we really need? I want us, as we read through this, to take all this practical information and just to recognize there's some things. Matter of fact, we talked about this. There's some things in this chapter that we don't have all the answers to. We don't have all the answers to some of the statements Jesus makes or the scenarios he gives. But I tell you what we can do. We can fully understand what it means to wait. I don't have to know everything. I don't have to have every answer. I don't have to have everything figured out. But I do have to orient my life where I wait on God. Why? Because he's what we need. Friends, keep reading. We're going to get into chapter number 13 tomorrow. It's going to be a good day. You're going to enjoy it. Keep reading Luke and keep keeping your eyes on Jesus. Bye.
Bye.